Chapter 11, Part 2. The Lex A repressor, Apophis, controls repair genes, Rec A, Rec N, and RUV AB, which is RUV AB. Excision repair genes, UVR AB and UVRD. The error-prone DNA polymerase gene, DNB. Researchers admit that Lex A has many functions that they still do not understand. However, when Rec A protein binds to a ssDNA due to the processing of DNA damage or stalled replication, the SOS signal transduction pathway results. The ssDNA is a signal that activates the otherwise dormant co-protease activity of Rec A, causing Rec A to facilitate the proteolytic self-cleavage of Lex A repressor or Apophis. In order to better understand SOS activity, let's go back in time to 3000 BCE when Thuban in the constellation of Draco was the pole star. When the text advised the deceased to go to the polar cusp, guided by the pole star, it may be that the pharaoh understood that the genetic result of this movement to Draco would be the slaying of the dragon Draco or Apophis. For cleavage of the Lex A repressor protein, the monster Apophis occurs when the DNA of the deceased merges into the lambda sun god, enters the whole cell, and activates the SOS response. This causes the RECA or Rec A filament to bind to a thymine dimer site on the DNA, activating a co-protease activity that cleaves the Lex A repressor, depressing the SOS regulon. From a mythic perspective, the deceased slays the dragon and wins eternity. Actually, the dragon or Lex A repressor catalyzes its own digestion in the face of the ssDNA Rec A filament. With the self-cleavage of the Lex A repressor protein, 42 genes are depressed and active. It is interesting that activated Rec A also facilitates the cleavage of phage repressors, maintaining the lysogenic stage, and UMUD, creating UMUD, the subunit of UMUD-C, allowing activity in translesion error-prone DNA synthesis. Lex A repressed polyprotein participates in most UV mutagenesis by inserting bases across the pyrimidine dimer. Pol 4 is required for the indirect mutation of phenomenon in which undamaged lambda DNA is mutated when added to UV irradiated cells. Actually, the correlative evidence for this process and the view for that Apophis is the Lex A repressor protein is found primarily in the pyramid text, the least corrupted evidence. The deceased cleaves Apophis. Idea strand 2829. Ra sees 4 coiled monster snake Apophis. Appeal to Thoth for protection against monster. Idea strand 30. Monster serpent poisons itself. Idea strand 31 through 32. Monster serpent goes into hole because 2 knots of elephantine were for horse. Idea strand 33. Horse tramples snake in sky / centipede on earth. And idea strand 34. White crown or horse goes on after absorbing Apophis. When UV damage occurs, Rec A protein becomes its second form, which is a protease, activating the self-destruction of the protein Lex A. With the destruction of the Lex A repressor protein, the operons are expressed or de-repressed. Some of the de-repressed proteins induce the SOS response. The text reports that what comes out of Apophis' mouth is turned back against yourself. In other words, Apophis, as the Lex A repressor protein, catalyzes its own digestion. Further, Apophis is described as a snake in the sky, O centipede, O earth, suggesting the result of Apophis' activity of repressing 42 genes results in many feet centipede on earth. The pyramid text state that Apophis is a 4-coiled monster, which describes the actual structure of the Lex A repressor as determined by 1HNMR spectroscopy. The structure contains 3 regular alpha helices and 1 anti-parallel beta sheet, exhibiting a zigzag coil-like shape. An anti-parallel beta sheet could easily be described as a coil. Nonetheless, the 4-unit structure of the Lex A repressor protein is similar to the textual reference of a 4-coiled monster. Still, if Apophis can be decoded as the Lex A repressor protein, we must consider why the monster Apophis retreats to his hole when he sees the 2 knots of elephantine meant for horse. The lambda lifestyle of Isis. Idea strand 30. Monster snake turns around because Seth is beheaded. Idea strand 31 through 32. Serpent goes into the hole for 2 knots of elephantine, word for horse. Phage lemma is a genetic control system involved in the action of repressor proteins regulating lysine versus lytic replication. As explained, Rec A also facilitates the cleavage of phage repressors, maintaining the lysogenic stage. The lambda repressor, which binds the operator sequences and prevents transcription, is the CI protein. With the one production of CI and the help of C2 and C3, lysine is established with the phage genome, integrating into the host chromosome where it remains dormant. By binding the DNA operator sites OL and OR, or operator left or right, transcription of N and CRO proteins are prevented. N protein, a positive transcription regulator, promotes RNA polymerase transcription of phage genes that activate DNA recombination and integration of the prophage. So we can see that there is a battle between CI protein and CRO protein over control of the 2 operator sequences, which determine whether the pathway will be lysogenic or lytic. Both proteins bind to the OR operator, but they bind differently. The operator site OR is actually 3 operators, O1, O2, OR2, and OR3. And the CI binds to the OR1 and OR2. in a preferential order. That is 1, then 2, then 3. Crow binds in the inverse manner, 3, then 2, then 1. If CI gets to the OR1 first, it captures the entire operator, stopping the crow and simulating its own synthesis. In addition, CI prefers right arm binding, whereas crow prefers left arm binding. So when crow preferentially binds to the left arm side first, beating out CI, the protein stops CI transcription and initiates its own transcription in a positive feedback loop that reminds one of the Egyptian image of Osiris bent backwards into a circle, a sign of rolling circle replication. Still, the question arises, how does Crow ever win this battle for the two operator sites and restore the rightful order Ma'at on the genome? If the cell DNA is badly damaged by UV radiation, the SOS response is triggered, which activates the whole cell protein REC-A. This enzyme destroys the lambda repressor CI and the crow wins. The phage induced by UV then goes into the lytic pathway, producing progeny by means of rolling circle replication. Also, if the nutritional state of the cell is poor, that is low glucose, then the lytic pathway is favored over the lysogenic. Once again, the idea that replication begins through recombination has been proposed for phage lambda. So the function of REC-A protein in recombination and coprotease or protease activity is important to lambda lytic lifestyle, crow production, and the excision of the prophet or the resurrection of Osiris. So we have decoded currently. Apophis equals the LEX-A repressor protein, and O1 and O2 equal 2 knots of elephantine for horse, 2 pillars in the mansion of 6.